The first time Delphine Kestrel saw Redemption Hollow, it looked like freedom from a distance. Wide sky, clean horizon, and a river that caught the last light like a strip of hammered silver. Up close, the town's promise curdled. Boards bowed on storefronts as if the wind itself meant to pry them apart. Wagons stood crooked in rutted streets. Smoke from cooking fires drifted over everything, but it didn't carry warmth so much as a warning, as if the air had learned to keep its distance. Delphine had ridden north for 3 weeks with only the bare necessities and a heart that refused to stop. She was Apache, raised to read the land the way other people read ink. Every ridge told a story. Every scrubby thicket held a memory of danger. Every creek bed promised water or promised death. She had learned that survival was not only speed but patience. Yet even patience had its limits, and the frontier's cruelty had a way of arriving on schedule. Her stagecoach had been due at dawn. The driver had warned her about the hollow road. Too many wagons, too few honest men. A corruptness settled in that stretch like dust that never washed out. The man she'd paid in Fort Marlow had promised passage, promised paperwork, promised safety, promised that the town would take her in. Those promises were the first lies. Redemption Hollow's feud was the second. Her father, long gone, long remembered, had said Redemption Hollow had once been a trading crossing, then a mining outpost, then a place where people believed the land belonged to the loudest family. The Kestrels and the Rourkes had been neighbors before they were enemies. Not enemies in the way most folks understood, no single raid that ended with peace talks around a table. It was a feud that grew in the soil. One death made the next death feel justified, and soon justification became tradition. Delphine carried that history without wanting it. She did not want vengeance. She wanted to live. The stagecoach ambush came on the afternoon when the heat made even the horses' breaths slow. The road dipped between 2 low hills, and the wagon's wheels splashed through a narrow stream as if the earth had opened its throat. At first it looked like nothing, maybe a group of drifters ahead, maybe a cow lost from a herd. Delphine watched from the corner where the curtain hung loose, her gloved hand resting on the edge of a small parcel. The parcels were always small on the frontier because anything larger became a target. Then the shots began. The first crack was followed by a silence so sudden Delphine felt her ears ring. The driver shouted for everyone to duck. Men on the wagon's bench fought for their rifles. Someone screamed, one sharp, startled sound, not the full cry of a person who had decided to keep screaming. It ended quickly, swallowed by the road. Delphine moved when she heard the second shot, not when she saw the third. Apache training had taught her how to listen under chaos. She slipped from the coach seat while the driver was still shouting instructions, and while the passengers were still trying to understand whether they were being hunted or only threatened. The landscape tried to hide her, the way it sometimes did for those who knew its language. She dropped behind the wheel, then farther back, where scrub and stone offered a kind of cover that was never perfect, but was better than nothing. Bullets stitched the air, and the smell of powder rose sharp and choking. She reached for the parcel in her saddlebag, the one thing she had carried from Fort Marlow to this road. Inside was a folded document sealed in oilcloth, and on the back, a small crest, the Kestrel marking. It was not a love letter or a prayer. It was a deed. Her family's deed. Her father had kept it hidden until he died, then left it to her as if paper could outlive blood. It named a tract near Redemption Hollow, land marked by survey lines and boundary stones. The feud had swallowed that land with paperwork as much as with violence. Men with stars and men with rifles had both insisted the deed was theirs by right of conflict. Delphine did not have the strength to win a court fight. She did not have the resources to buy silence. But she had the deed, and she had a plan. Get to Redemption Hollow, find the next generation before their hearts hardened, and hand over proof that the land's claim did not belong to the loudest weapon. The ambush broke her plan. A figure appeared on the ridge, one of the men who'd loosed the shots. He wasn't moving like a robber. He was moving like someone finishing a task. Delphine realized too late that the stagecoach wasn't the target. She was. The attacker took a step, and in that brief moment the afternoon light caught his badge, a dull star pinned low on his coat. Not a hired gun, a lawman. The gunfire shifted toward her hiding place. Delphine's breath tightened with each impact in the dirt. She crawled backward toward a stand of scrub and rocks, trying to keep her body low. Then a bullet hit near her shoulder. Not enough to tear her open, just enough to jerk her muscles into pain. She tried to keep moving. She forced herself to breathe. She told herself she could make it, that she could slip away like she always had. But the frontier didn't care about promises. Her leg caught on a root. The snag felt small, insignificant, like a nuisance, until pain made it large. She lost traction. The world tipped. Her body fell into the shallow ditch beside the road. The shooter advanced, boots careful as if he expected her to stay still out of instinct. Delphine's vision blurred at the edges, heat rising along her skin. She used her forearm to drag herself behind a stone, but the stone offered only a narrow shield against the afternoon. A shadow fell across the dirt. She heard the lawman's voice, calm in the way cruel men liked their cruelty to sound. "There you are." Delphine tried to twist into a position where she could see his face, but the world swam. The parcel pressed into her palm through numb fingers. She squeezed it anyway, even as her body turned heavy. "Marshal Crow," she managed, the name coming out with more air than intention. At that, his boots stopped. Marshal Gideon Crow stepped closer. He carried his rifle like a tool, not a weapon meant for ceremony. His badge glinted faintly despite the dust. He looked at Delphine as if she were a problem he had already solved in his head. "You were never meant to reach town," he said. Delphine's mouth went dry. "I was meant to live." Crow crouched. He reached for her parcel, but she flinched. Too late. He took it with a grip that was gentle only in comparison to what it could have been. "You can't live on paper," he said. "Paper doesn't stop bullets." Then he stood, and the movement was so decisive, Delphine understood her fate with clarity. He wasn't simply taking the deed, he was taking her future. He gestured toward another rider on horseback. "Check her. Make sure. If she's still breathing when we pass again, she's either stubborn or foolish. Either way, it'll cost someone later." Later. Delphine heard the word and thought of her father's stories. Later was how men justified burying people alive. Later was how towns learned not to look. She wanted to scream for help. She wanted to reach for a weapon. But her body wasn't cooperating, and the road was lonely in a way that made even screams sound like they belonged to someone else. The next sound was not Crow's voice. It was the soft, steady jingle of harness leather, the kind of sound a horse makes when it belongs to someone who has traveled this kind of land for years. Delphine's eyes fluttered toward the ridge. A man rode slowly down the road, his horse careful around ruts and stones. He wore a weathered hat. A rifle was slung across his back, not brand new, but maintained. The man's posture wasn't stiff with swagger. It was stiff with awareness, shoulders set to listen. He stopped where the road dipped and climbed, where the world could see both the ditch and the ridge. Crow turned his head, annoyed rather than surprised. "Calder," he said. The name carried familiarity, like a rope thrown in the same direction for years. Calder Rourke dismounted without hurry. He didn't draw a pistol, he didn't shout. He only looked at Delphine, then at the deadened space around her, then back at Crow. "2 shots to stop the wagon," Calder said, voice low. "1 to finish. You're not hunting, you're cleaning up." Crow's mouth tightened. "This town needs order." Calder's gaze sharpened. "It needs justice." Crow stepped forward, slow. "You don't get to decide what justice is. You're not Marshal." Calder's eyes flicked once to the badge at Crow's chest. Then he looked again at Delphine. Delphine tried to hold his attention. She tried to raise a hand, but her fingers trembled as if her body belonged to someone else. She realized that whoever Calder was, whoever he had been in Redemption Hollow, his attention could become her breath. Crow reached for the parcel again, and this time Calder's hand moved first. Calder did not grab Crow by the collar. He simply put himself between the lawman and Delphine, standing like a fence. The frontier respected fences even when it pretended not to. "You're leaving her," Calder said. Crow's expression turned cold. "She's an Apache woman, Calder. Folks don't understand what to do with her. Folks get scared. You should know that fear turns into trouble." Delphine heard the words and felt the weight of them. Apache, scared, trouble. Crow didn't see her as a person, he saw her as a spark. Calder's voice deepened. "She's breathing. That's enough for me." Crow looked past Calder as if counting seconds. "You'll be a fool to offer help. Redemption Hollow owes your family blood, and your family owes this town obedience. Don't turn yourself into another casualty in the feud." Feud. Delphine closed her eyes for a moment, not from weakness, but from the sudden clarity of the plot. This ambush wasn't only about her deed. It was about controlling the next generation's choice. If Delphine reached town alive, she could speak, could prove, could disrupt. Crow had decided she was a threat to order, and the town's version of order was simply a contract between two old families, written in violence. Calder held Crow's gaze. "I'm not taking orders from you." Crow's hand drifted toward his holster, and Delphine's heart slammed against her ribs like it wanted to break out and run without her. But Calder moved first, too quick to be called a miracle, too clean to be called accident. He pulled something from his own belt and tossed it to the ground between them. It landed with a dull clink. A brass badge, smaller, older, battered by weather. The star wasn't tarnished the way Crow's was. It looked like it had lived through campaigns and had been carried by hands that respected its weight. Crow stared at it. Calder's voice was steady. "I'm deputy for as long as I'm willing to be." Crow scoffed, but his eyes betrayed him. "You don't have authority." Calder crouched beside Delphine, ignoring the exchange behind him. "I have consent from the truth," he said, like it was a legal phrase. Delphine's breath rattled. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to curse him. But the only thing she could do was blink, and even blinking felt like effort. Calder checked her wound with practiced gentleness. He didn't pull at her clothing like some rough man would. He eased her pant leg aside, revealing blood that had already started to clot. He found where it had struck and wrapped it with clean cloth from his saddlebag. Delphine watched his hands move. They were scarred too, but his scars looked earned through work rather than cruelty. "You're going to get her killed," Crow said, voice sharp again. Calder stood, still between Delphine and Crow. "She's already been targeted. That's not new. What's new is you leaving her alive." Crow's jaw flexed. He could have shot Calder. He could have shouted for his men. But Crow hesitated. The hesitation of a man who wanted control, yet had learned unpredictability could break plans. He stepped back. "You'll regret this." Calder didn't answer with threats. He only signaled with his head toward his horse. "We'll take her to town. Let the people decide if they want order or mercy." Crow's eyes narrowed. He looked toward the ridge where his men lingered at a distance, watching like wolves pretending to be guards. Then Crow's face hardened into something like a smile. "The town will decide, and when they do, the Apache woman won't be part of it." He turned his horse, leaving behind dust like a closing curtain. Calder guided Delphine upright slowly. He wrapped an extra shawl around her shoulders and slipped an arm under her back so she wouldn't topple. Her body shook with pain and shock. She wanted to resist because resisting was an instinct, yet there was a truth in his care that made resistance feel like a betrayal of survival. As they moved, Delphine caught glimpses of the road, the stagecoach wreck, the broken harness, a smear of blood on the dirt that looked like an unfinished sentence. She wondered how many others had died for a secret deed. She wondered how many townsfolk had looked away. Redemption Hollow appeared soon enough. A handful of buildings clustered around a square, a church with a steeple leaning slightly as if it were tired, and a saloon with a sign painted in cheerful colors that could not disguise the rot beneath. Delphine expected the town's first act to be cruelty. Instead, it was silence. People watched from doorways and windows. Men stood with arms crossed, leaning as if their stances could keep them safe from what they were witnessing. Women pulled children closer, and their eyes carried the same question. Will this bring trouble to us? Calder led Delphine toward the back of a stable where he could use shade, where he could work without an audience. He placed her on a pallet and fetched water. The stable smelled of straw, sweat, and horse medicine, honest smells. Delphine's breathing steadied only slightly. Her mind remained sharp in its pain. She tried to measure what she had gained. A living body, a hidden deed still in Calder's mind if he'd looked at it. Calder returned with a tin cup and cloth. He knelt beside her and dipped the cloth into water, then pressed it to her forehead with care. "You're shivering," he said. Delphine swallowed. "I'm always cold when I'm afraid." Calder's brows rose. "Afraid of what?" Delphine stared at him through the curtain of her hair. Her eyes held the hard shine of someone who had lived through more than most would admit. "Afraid you'll change your mind. Afraid you'll realize helping an Apache woman is the easiest way to get yourself buried." Calder looked away briefly, toward the stable door where shadows moved. "You're not wrong about getting buried," he said, "but I'm done letting fear do my thinking." Delphine's throat tightened. "You're not from here." Calder's mouth twitched. "I was raised a few miles out, on land my family used to hold. I came back because I thought I could keep the worst parts from repeating." He set the cup aside. "What's your name?" Delphine could have lied. The frontier rewarded lies the way the wilderness rewarded camouflage. But something about Calder's eyes made her want to tell the truth. "Delphine," she said. "Kestrel." Calder flinched subtly, as if the name carried a weight that struck his ribs. "You're Kestrel," he murmured. Delphine nodded slowly. "My people once held land near here." "And now?" Calder asked. Delphine's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. "Now there are men with deeds that aren't theirs, and marshals who think the law is only for keeping women quiet." Calder exhaled. "Crow's the kind of man who calls quiet order." Delphine leaned her head back against the boards. "He called my breathing a mistake." Calder's jaw set. "He won't get to call much else." Outside, the sound of boots approached the stable. Calder stood, and Delphine saw his muscles tighten like wire. A voice called from the doorway. "Calder Rourke!" It was Marshal Crow's voice, but he spoke like he belonged here more than anyone else. Calder didn't answer immediately. He only moved to block the doorway with his body. Crow stepped in with two men behind him. They carried rifles and wore expressions that said they didn't think twice about using them. Crow's gaze landed on Delphine, then slid to the deed parcel visible near Calder's saddlebag. "You brought her to town," Crow said, as if surprised that Calder had obeyed his fate. Calder's voice was quiet. "She's wounded." Crow nodded toward Delphine. "And Apache women don't need care. They need removal." Delphine's eyes widened, not with fear, but with anger that cut through pain. "You don't get to decide who needs what." Crow's smile sharpened. "I'm Marshal." Calder lifted his chin, and his face held a stubbornness that looked like grief wearing a tougher coat. "You're a man with a star you bought with promises. You're not the law, not to me." Crow stepped closer. "You're protecting her because you think it makes you better." Delphine stared at him and thought about all the ways men tried to make mercy feel like weakness. "I don't need you to approve," she said. Crow's eyes flashed. "I approve of what benefits Redemption Hollow." "What benefits your pockets," Calder said. The men behind Crow shifted their rifles. The stable suddenly felt smaller, the air thick with impending violence. Delphine's mind raced. She couldn't fight 3 men and a marshal. She couldn't even stand. She needed words. She needed proof. She needed leverage. She reached for the parcel inside Calder's saddlebag with a movement that made her wound complain, but the pain was a price she could pay. Calder glanced at her, warning in his eyes, but he didn't stop her. Delphine pulled the oilcloth free and opened it with shaking fingers. The deed was there, crisp enough to carry meaning even with age. It bore the Kestrel crest again, sharp, deliberate, and survey lines that matched Delphine's memory. Names of boundary owners from long ago. A notation about rights transferred after the last treaty. Crow's eyes narrowed as he read. Calder's posture shifted. He looked from the deed to Crow, and in that moment Delphine saw something that looked like recognition and disgust tangling together. Crow folded the deed partway without permission, then froze. "This is forged," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence of a man speaking an easy lie. Delphine swallowed hard. "It was sealed by my father's hands." Crow's face tightened. "Your father stole it." "That's not what the paper says," Delphine replied. Crow's gaze snapped to Calder. "And you, what do you think happens if this deed is heard in court? The next generation will remember which families bled, and it'll start again. There are boys in town who still chase grudges like they're hunting partners. You bringing this woman into town doesn't end the feud, it gives it a new target." Calder's expression went blank for a moment, like a man searching the inside of his own chest for something he'd lost there. Delphine sensed the truth of it. The feud didn't only live in the old men's mouths. It lived in boys learning what strength meant. "What are you afraid of?" Delphine asked Crow. Crow's eyes were cold. "I'm afraid of losing control." Calder stepped forward. "Your control costs lives." Crow turned his head slightly, as if weighing which lie would hurt most. "Her kind doesn't learn by kindness. She'll be back in the hills by tomorrow. You'll be left explaining your compassion to people who can't afford it." Delphine forced herself to breathe evenly. "I came to Redemption Hollow for a reason." Crow gestured toward the door, impatient. "Then you'll leave for a reason too. You'll walk under escort out past the river bend, and you'll disappear like the last Apache woman did." Delphine's blood chilled. "Which Apache woman?" Crow's mouth twitched. "The one who tried to claim land. The one who wouldn't stop asking questions. People don't ask questions when they're dead." Delphine's hand trembled as she lowered the deed. Her mind flashed with the memory of her father's warning. Some graves are made before the body is cold. Calder moved closer to Delphine, shielding her as if her body could be a prayer. He spoke to Crow without shouting. "You don't get to talk about her like she was an animal you buried." Crow's eyes glinted. "You can't prove what happened. In a town like this, proof doesn't survive." Delphine understood then. Crow had engineered the ambush to destroy the evidence, but he'd failed. Calder's intervention gave her the deed back at the right moment. Crow's next move would be to destroy Calder's credibility. Crow turned toward one of his men. "Tell the saloon keeper I want witnesses tonight." The stable door creaked as if the world leaned in to hear. Calder's eyes narrowed. "You're holding a public judgment." Crow's smile returned. "A justice demonstration. The town will see what happens when outsiders and Apache women try to stir old wounds. They'll be grateful I keep the peace." Delphine's anger flared into something else. Clarity. If Crow held a show, Delphine could turn that show into a choice the town couldn't ignore. But first, she needed to buy time. She needed to keep her body alive through the next hours. Calder stepped toward the door as if to follow Crow, but Delphine grabbed his sleeve with a weak grip. Calder looked back. "What?" Delphine's eyes searched his face. "If you fight him, you'll only become another story, another grave. I need him to think he's winning." Calder stared at her, then something softened. "And what do you need?" Delphine's lips parted. "I need the next generation, not the old men." Calder's gaze shifted toward the yard where boys might gather for work, where gossip traveled faster than wheat. "You mean my nephew?" Delphine nodded once. She didn't know the details, but she felt the feud's skeleton. "The boy who learns how to be strong by hurting. That one." Calder's jaw tightened. "My nephew, Daniel." Crow's men moved closer, impatient. Crow called out, "You'll all listen tonight. I'll decide what this Apache woman is worth." Calder's voice sharpened. "You don't get to price people." Crow only shrugged. In Redemption Hollow, everything has a price. When Crow left the stable, the town's silence returned like a curtain falling. The two men lingered a moment longer, watching Calder as if waiting for him to fail. Then they left too, dragging fear with them. Delphine exhaled a shaky breath. Pain throbbed along her leg, but it was less frightening than the moment she'd felt trapped inside Crow's plan. Calder sat beside her. He removed his hat and rubbed his forehead with the back of his hand, the gesture of a man who had been holding his breath for years. "Why help her?" Delphine asked him quietly. Calder looked at her, and the answer came slow, as if it had to cross a river inside him. "Because my brother died because he tried to do what was right. He tried to stop my family's feud from eating the next generation. He believed the town would change." Delphine watched his eyes go distant. "Did it?" Calder's voice cracked slightly. "No, it ate him first. And I spent years telling myself that the right thing never works." He looked back at her. "Then you fell off the road, bleeding and stubborn, and I remembered what my brother said right before he died." Delphine leaned forward despite the pain. "What did he say?" Calder swallowed. "He said mercy is a kind of courage the feud can't understand." Delphine's throat tightened. The words were simple, yet they landed like a stone placed carefully in a riverbed, settling, becoming part of the current. That night, Calder moved Delphine from the stable to a back room in a modest boarding house owned by a widow named Hester. Hester didn't ask questions. She only handed Calder clean bandages and bread that tasted like salt and survival. Hester's eyes were cautious, but not cruel. She watched Delphine like someone reading a weather forecast. "Marshal Crow's stirring the town," she warned. Calder nodded. "I know." Hester hesitated, then said, "There were people who said your family started the wrong fire. There were people who said Kestrels deserved what happened." Delphine's hands clenched around the blanket. "They always say someone deserved it. It helps them sleep." Hester's gaze softened. "Sleep is a luxury." Outside, the sound of laughter from the saloon carried too far, like men were trying to drink away their own consciences. Calder left Delphine in the care of Hester and slipped out toward the square. He moved with urgency, but not panic, slipping past shuttered windows, listening to voices. He found Daniel near the hitching posts, a lanky boy with ink-stained hands. Daniel had been clerk once, then forced into carrying messages as the feud grew. He was the kind of boy who wanted to be respected and didn't know what respect should look like. Daniel looked up as Calder approached. "Uncle Calder," he said, cautious. Calder stopped a few paces away. "Come with me." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Where?" Calder's voice was firm. "To the boarding house, now." Daniel's mouth opened, then shut. Fear flickered across his face. "Is she—" "Alive," Calder replied, "wounded, and you can either be part of the story that kills her or part of the story that ends something." Daniel swallowed. Marshal Crow will do what he always does," Calder said. "He'll try to turn your anger into obedience. But you're not a tool. You're a person." Daniel looked around as if expecting someone to call him names. No one approached. The square held its breath. Finally, Daniel nodded once. "All right." They walked back together. Inside the room, Delphine sat propped against pillows Hester had stitched from old quilts. Her hair was damp with sweat. Her face had bruises in places it shouldn't. Yet when she saw Daniel, her eyes sharpened with recognition. Daniel stopped in the doorway as if he'd stumbled into a church and didn't know whether praying was allowed. Delphine held his gaze. "You're the boy," she said. Daniel's throat bobbed. My family—" Delphine let the sentence hang for him to finish in his own mind. Calder stood near the door, arms crossed, watching Daniel struggle with the old poison. Delphine slowly reached for the deed parcel. Her hands shook, but she managed to place the paper on the blanket where Daniel could see the crest clearly. "These lines," Delphine said, "belong to us, not to your family, not to Crow. To the land my people were promised, long before any feud taught you what to hate." Daniel leaned forward, eyes scanning. "But the boundary stones—" Delphine nodded once. "The stones were moved, or the stories were changed. Or someone decided the past could be erased, like chalk. Daniel's face tightened. My uncle says your people took land by force. Delphine's voice grew gentle, which was more dangerous than anger. Your uncle says many things to keep you from asking how they know. Daniel flinched at the word keep. Calder watched with quiet tension. He didn't speak. He let Daniel hear himself thinking. Delphine continued. Marshal Crow has been hunting the deed. He's not protecting law, he's protecting a lie. The room grew quiet except for the distant clatter of mugs. Daniel's eyes flicked to Calder. Why are you doing this? Calder took a slow breath. Because my brother died when we tried to stop the feud. Daniel's eyes widened. So you want revenge now? Calder's head shook. No, I want an end. Delphine looked at Daniel again. Will you let your family be brave enough to stop hurting? Or will you keep repeating what's been handed to you? Daniel's mouth trembled. If I stop, they'll say I'm weak. Delphine's gaze didn't waver. Strength is not silence. Strength is choosing not to become the thing you hate. Outside, a bell rang, thin and sharp, calling men toward the saloon where Crow had decided the whole town would witness. Hester touched Delphine's shoulder. Don't stand, she murmured. Delphine gave a strained smile. I don't plan to stand. I plan to speak. Calder looked at her with concern, then nodded. He helped Daniel ready Delphine's shawl and wrap her injured leg as firmly as comfort allowed. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her face. When they stepped outside, the night air carried cold. Stars glittered overhead like cold sparks in a forge. The town square held warm light from lanterns, and within that light people gathered with hungry curiosity. Marshal Crow stood near the saloon's doorway with his star bright under gaslight. His voice boomed as if he were reading a sermon. Town folks, Crow called. This woman's traveled the road of lies. She's wounded, yes, but her wound doesn't make her story true. We're here to decide what happens next. Calder stepped forward before Daniel could be pushed aside. Crow's eyes locked onto Delphine. Ah, he said. The deputy brings her back like a stray dog. Calder didn't react. He only raised his chin. She's not property. She's a person. Crow scoffed. In Redemption Hollow, property keeps the town fed. Delphine lifted her head. Her voice carried, surprising even herself with how steady it became when it left her mouth. Your town isn't fed by property, it's fed by people being too afraid to contradict you. Murmurs rose. A man in the crowd spat into the dirt. Apache talk don't mean anything. Another voice snapped back. But that deed, if it's true, then the land. Crow raised a hand to silence them. No deed, no truth, only trouble. He turned to Daniel. Boy, your family remembers what happens when outsiders get ideas. Daniel's face went pale. He looked at Delphine, then at the crowd, then at Calder. Delphine could see it. Daniel's heart was fighting the training he'd received. The feud wasn't only in men's fists. It was in the habits that told him what to feel. Calder's voice cut in, low and urgent. Daniel, decide now. Daniel swallowed and stepped forward, shaking but standing straight. He held the deed parcel with hands that didn't feel steady but refused to drop. Marshal Crow, Daniel said, voice cracking at the start, then steadier. The deed says the land is Kestrel property. Crow's expression hardened. Deeds can be tampered with. Daniel's eyes flashed. Then why were you on the road shooting at her? The crowd went still. Crow's stare fixed on Daniel. He didn't deny it. He didn't need to deny it. He only needed to twist. Crow spoke carefully, like a man arranging stones to build a wall. I shot at the stagecoach because it was under attack. I was protecting my town. Delphine's voice rose. You were protecting a lie! Crow's jaw clenched. You think you're so clever because you carry paper. Delphine nodded once, accepting his insult as a fact rather than a weapon. Paper only becomes power when people choose to believe. Then she pulled something from beneath her shawl, a small bundle of leather and beaded cloth that contained, she revealed, an old treaty token. an item her father had taught her to keep. It was not just decoration, it was proof of kinship and agreement, passed down through ceremonies. The crowd recoiled slightly at the sight of a native token displayed in public. Yet in that recoil was fear of being wrong. Delphine held the token up so the lantern light could catch the beads. This was given to my family when the boundary was first agreed. It was meant to protect both sides. Crow's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're showing. Delphine's voice softened, turning sharper through gentleness. I know exactly what I'm showing. You just don't want the town to remember that your star was never the first authority. Calder felt the tension rise. He could hear it, like wind moving through dry grass. Crow stepped toward Delphine and the crowd shifted as if making space for a punch. Crow reached for her token. Delphine pulled it back, not with flinching panic, but with practiced control. If you take it, she said, you'll prove you're afraid of what it represents. Crow's hand froze midair. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He didn't follow his uncle's feud logic. He didn't swing fists to prove loyalty. He pulled a small notebook from his coat and stepped closer to Crow. My family's clerk records, Daniel said. The ones my uncle kept. I found them in the attic. They show the deed was challenged and the survey notes were altered. The crowd broke into shocked murmurs. Crow's face changed, the first real crack of fear appearing beneath his practiced calm. Calder's eyes widened as he watched. He had suspected something, but Daniel's evidence turned suspicion into certainty. Delphine's heart pounded. She hadn't expected Daniel to choose truth this fast. She hadn't expected this particular betrayal, an internal betrayal of the feud. Crow's voice became louder, frantic in its attempt to sound controlled. Those records are irrelevant. A boy can't understand land disputes. Daniel's chin lifted. I understand that you told me who to hate. I understand that you told me my family was right without letting me see the proof. Crow lunged toward Daniel. Calder moved. Not with a gun drawn. Calder wasn't a man of quick cruelty. He used his body to block, to shove Crow back just enough that Crow stumbled on the uneven boards near the saloon steps. A scream rose from someone in the crowd. Then another voice. Lawman! Men surged forward, but Calder's presence, his refusal to be intimidated, stayed them. Daniel stood with the notebook in his hands like it was a shield. Delphine, still wounded, stepped forward carefully. Pain pushed at her, but she didn't let it stop her. She looked at Marshal Crow and said, You didn't just want the deed. You wanted the town to keep forgetting what kind of man you are. Crow glared at her. Apache, he began. Delphine cut him off. Don't call me what you fear. It doesn't make you right. The crowd's mood shifted. People didn't suddenly become saints. The frontier still ran on hard choices and hard hunger. Yet in that moment, they saw Crow not as a protector, but as a predator wearing a badge. A man from the edge of the crowd cleared his throat. If the records are true, then the land, another answered, then the feud's been paid for by lies. Someone shouted, Where's the sheriff's boss? Where's the county? Crow's face turned gray under lantern light. You can't summon justice on rumors. Calder's voice came from near Delphine's shoulder. You can't hide behind rumors when the next generation keeps receipts. That line moved through the crowd like a match toward dry tinder. Daniel lifted his notebook again. I'm going to town clerk in the morning. I'm taking these notes to the county. Crow staggered back, his men shifting. One of Crow's men raised his rifle slightly, but the crowd's collective stance made it clear that firing would turn into open war against the town's own people. Crow realized he was losing. He chose a final tactic: speed. He swung his gaze to Delphine and said, If you're so sure your deeds are true, then you won't be here by sunrise. I'll make sure. Then he moved, past Calder, toward Delphine's injured body. Delphine didn't have time to fully react. Pain slowed her reflexes. She lifted her hands instinctively, but Crow's reach was longer and his boots sure. Calder grabbed Crow's coat, pulling him back. Crow snarled and tried to twist free. In the scramble, the unexpected twist revealed itself, not in what Crow planned, but in what Calder had done earlier. Calder reached into his coat and produced a small vial of clear liquid he'd kept hidden. He flung it to the ground near Crow's feet. The vial shattered, and the liquid spread, catching lantern light for a second before burning away with a quick, sharp hiss. Crow's men jerked backward, cursing. "What the hell is that?" Calder's voice was harsh, but controlled. "A warning that I'm not unarmed." The liquid wasn't poison. It was lamp oil treated with quick burn powder designed to flare, not to kill. Calder had prepared for Crow's move, knowing fire had a way of scattering men who relied on intimidation. A flare of flame erupted at the edge of the crowd, forcing people to step back, forcing Crow's men to retreat to avoid burning their clothes. Crow couldn't move through the chaos. Delphine used that instant to slip back with Hester's help. Hester, who had been quiet until then, grabbed Delphine's arm and pulled her toward the boarding house. Calder blocked the doorway until Daniel arrived with the notebook pressed to his chest. Crow's rage followed them, but rage couldn't rewrite the evidence now held by a boy who had stopped obeying. Later, when the town's heat had cooled into uneasy talk, Calder returned to the boarding room where Delphine lay wrapped in blankets. Her wound had been cleaned again. Her breath came easier now. Daniel stood near the door, shoulders tense, as if he expected Crow's men to burst in. Delphine sat up slowly. "You did that deed show tonight," she told Daniel. "Now you have to see it through." Daniel nodded, eyes haunted. "I will." Calder sat beside Delphine. "Your evidence will get you trouble," he said. Delphine's gaze softened. "Trouble is already in the house. At least now it has a reason." Daniel swallowed. "Uncle Calder, are you done with the feud?" Calder looked at Delphine, then away, as if the answer required both truth and grief. "I'm done trying to win with violence," he said. Delphine reached for Calder's hand. Her fingers were cold, but Calder's grip warmed them. "Then we'll build something the feud never planned," she said. Daniel's expression shifted, hopeful despite himself. "What?" Delphine's eyes met his. "A future where my people can walk these roads without hunting eyes." Then she turned to Calder, and the ache beneath her words became something like invitation. "And a home where law isn't just a star that belongs to men like Crow." Calder's throat tightened. He leaned closer until his forehead touched hers briefly, an intimacy earned through risk rather than sudden desire. "We can't erase what happened," he murmured. Delphine nodded. "No, but we can refuse to keep making it happen." As the days passed, Daniel carried the records to the county clerk. People in Redemption Hollow whispered about what Delphine had shown, about the token and the deed and the clerk's notes. Some resented the disruption. Others felt shame surfacing like water after drought. Marshal Crow tried to retaliate in the shadows, sending threats to the widow Hester and warning Daniel that county men don't care about border fights. Yet Daniel had already learned a new habit, keeping receipts. Calder stayed near Delphine more than he left. He repaired a broken fence line at dawn and brought her warm broth at dusk. He kept watch by the window when men passed too close. He didn't press her for promises. He simply proved that help could be steady. Delphine, still wounded, moved with the determination of someone used to carrying burden alone. She helped Hester mend quilts, and she taught Daniel small truths about land, how water behaved, where erosion hid, how the soil remembered. That was the surprising change. Their romance did not arrive like a kiss in a gunfight. It arrived like trust built under chores, under shared fear, under conversations spoken softly so the world wouldn't hear and intervene. One afternoon, as the sun pressed heat into the planks, a rider arrived from the county with papers bearing official seals. There was no triumphant band, no church choir, just ink and authority. The decision was written plainly. The deed Delphine carried was valid. The survey alterations were illegal, and the county demanded a lawful survey reset. Redemption Hollow erupted into talk. Some men argued, some sulked. A few bowed their heads as if the shame had finally found a place to land. Calder stood outside with Delphine while Daniel read the papers aloud. Delphine's face remained controlled, but her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "I came for land," she said quietly. "I stayed for something else." Calder's gaze softened. "You mean me?" Delphine didn't laugh. She only nodded once, accepting the truth with a calm that made it feel like fate rather than confession. Then the final twist revealed itself fully. The land wasn't only returning to Delphine's family. The county's reset also established a boundary grant for a schoolhouse and shared water access, rights that older town records had claimed had never existed. The deed, the token, the clerk's notes, everything Delphine had carried, had always been meant to protect more than a tract of ground. It had been meant to protect the next generation from a feud that consumed people like hunger. Daniel looked stunned. So the feud was planned, not just started? Delphine's mouth tightened. Men planned it the way men build fences, so they can charge toll for crossing. Calder exhaled. And Crow was the toll keeper. Daniel swallowed. "What do we do now?" Delphine turned to him and spoke like an elder, though she was not old. "You stop teaching hatred as if it's heritage." Daniel nodded, blinking hard. "I will." That night, when lanterns burned low and the town finally had something new to fear, change instead of violence, Calder returned to Delphine's room. She sat by the window, shawl wrapped around her injured leg, stars reflected in her eyes. He brought a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For you," he said. Delphine unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather pouch, stamped with a simple mark Calder had carved himself, a boundary line with a small flame at its center. "What is it?" she asked. Calder hesitated, then smiled faintly. "It's a promise of my own, a place to keep papers safe, and a place to keep what matters." Delphine's fingers brushed the pouch. "And your feud?" Calder leaned against the doorframe, tired and grateful. "I can't undo what happened to my brother," he said, "but I can choose not to repeat it." Delphine stood slowly, pain flaring. Calder moved instantly to help, his hands gentle as if her body were a fragile truth. They didn't kiss like the frontier romances promised. They didn't rush. Instead, they stood close, breathing the same dust-soft air. And when Delphine finally leaned into Calder's shoulder, it felt like the first moment of safety either of them had tasted in years. Outside, Redemption Hollow's wind moved through the streets like a warning and like a blessing. Inside, two people made a quiet decision that could outlast any Marshal's star. Delphine's future no longer depended on whether men like Crow would permit her life. Her future depended on love chosen against the grain of tradition. Calder kissed her temple once, slow, respectful, certain. And Delphine closed her eyes as if she had finally found the right direction. When dawn arrived, it didn't bring a miracle sky. It brought hard work and lawful surveys and a schoolhouse yet to be built. But the ache beneath the wide-open freedom eased into something steady. In Redemption Hollow, the next generation refused to carry the feud forward. And in the space where violence had once been the only story told, a new kind of love began. One that survived because it was built on truth, mercy, and courage.